Afia was used to being invisible. In the grand estate of the Adebowale family, where marble floors shimmered and chandeliers whispered luxury, her presence passed like a shadow. She was the daughter of Halima, the housemaid who had served the Adebowales for 22 loyal years. While the other staff treated her like a child of the help, Afia walked the hallways with quiet dignity. She was 17, soft-spoken and thoughtful. Her evenings were spent under the mango tree behind the servant quarters, buried in old school books passed down by kind neighbors. Her mother earned just enough to keep her in school, barely. Still, Afia dreamed big, of a scholarship, of their future away from dusting imported vases and folding other people's laundry. It was on one such evening, book in lap, that he first spoke to her. "You always read so seriously." "What's the point if it's not fun?" came a voice behind her. She looked up, startled. It was Dio, the billionaire's only son, the heir, tall, confident, with the kind of smile that got away with anything. He was home from university. In the UK, here for a break before beginning work at his father's company. Afia lowered her gaze. "It is fun to me, sir," he chuckled. "Don't sir me, please. I'm not that old. Call me Dio." That was the beginning. At first, it was harmless. He would pass by her reading spot, sometimes toss a question at her, sometimes ask about the book she was holding. Over time, their conversations stretched. He would sit beside her, close but not touching, and ask about her life, her dreams, her mother. "No one's ever asked me those things," Afia said once, her voice barely above a whisper. "Well, they should," he replied, watching her with a curiosity he didn't understand. To Afia, Dio was everything she was not, wealthy, powerful, educated abroad. Yet he listened to her. He teased her gently, admired her mind. It felt like a fairy tale, the kind she stopped believing in long ago. To Dio, Afia was refreshingly different. Unlike the girls in Lagos clubs who chased his name and bank account, she didn't care about his car or his father's money. She had fire in her words, an unpolished honesty. It intrigued him, and her beauty, natural, quiet, crept up, on him like a song you don't realize you're humming until it's stuck in your head. But this was Nigeria. This was class and power and image. Maid's daughters did not fall in love with billionaire sons. They both knew it, and yet temptation is a slow-burning flame. One night, during a storm that rattled the windows and filled the halls with silence, Dio found her again by the mango tree, drenched, shivering, eyes red from tears. "They said my school fees weren't paid. Mama tried, but—" Her voice cracked. "I have to drop out." Without thinking, he took off his jacket, wrapping it around her. "No, I'll handle it." She looked at him, uncertain. "Why would you—" "Because I care," he said, softly tucking her soaked hair behind her ear, and then he kissed her. It was gentle, unsure, and for a moment the world stood still. A maid's daughter and a billionaire's son, under African rain, bound by a kiss neither of them was ready for. That night was the beginning of everything, and the end of innocence. Dio began sneaking down more often. He took her out, in secret, to quiet places, back roads where no one would see. He promised her a life, whispered words of forever in the dark. Afia, young and hopeful, believed him. Her heart, untouched by betrayal, opened fully. She didn't notice how careful he was not to let anyone find out. She didn't question why he never called when he was in town, unless he was sure his parents wouldn't be around. She only knew how it felt when he held her hand. She only knew the warmth in his voice when he said, "I want you to be mine." And for a time that was enough, but shadows, no matter how still, cannot hide the truth forever. Afia's world bloomed quietly, like a rose growing in secret behind a wall. Dio had paid her school fees, without telling anyone, and the principal had called her back to class. He said it was a scholarship arranged by a friend. She didn't ask questions. She didn't want to break the magic. Their love, if that's what it could be called, grew in whispers. They met at odd hours, at the garden shed when the house was asleep, behind the driver's quarters when the guards changed shifts. He brought her books, chocolates, once even a gold necklace that she refused, but he left it in her school bag anyway. "I can't wear this," she whispered, clutching it. What if someone sees? Then let them, he replied. I want you to have beautiful things, but beautiful things, Afia would learn, come at a cost. Soon kisses became touches. Touches turned into need. She tried to draw lines, but love, or what felt like it, blurred them. He said he wanted her, promised he'd marry her one day. He would take her abroad, introduce her to his friends, show his parents when the time was right. She believed him. She had never loved anyone else. She had never been loved before. Then came the morning she felt the shift. She woke up with nausea, a heaviness in her chest. At first she thought it was the heat or stress, but when her period missed a second month, she knew. She stared at the pregnancy test in the small washroom behind the staff quarters. 2 lines. Her knees buckled. The stick dropped from her hand and clattered on the tiled floor. She was 18, unmarried and pregnant. The first person she told was Dio. He didn't speak for a long time. She held his hand tightly. We can handle this. You love me, right? His jaw tensed. I didn't plan for this, Afia. You think I did? He stood, pacing. My father will kill me. My mother. She'll call it scandal. Do you have any idea what this could do to me? She blinked, slowly withdrawing her hand to you. He turned to her, voice low. You don't understand, Afia. I'm the only heir. My father's company is preparing to launch in South Africa next year. If this leaks... She stared at him, heart thudding. So, what are you saying? I just need time, he mumbled. Time to figure this out. Just don't tell anyone, please. Days turned into weeks. He avoided her. When she texted, he replied with cold, brief messages. She tried to wait. She told herself he was scared, not cruel. She prayed. Then one afternoon, the real storm hit. Halima, Afia's mother, was summoned to the main house. The Madame Dio's mother stood by the window, arms folded, lips drawn tight. I want her out of this house, she said without turning around. Madam, your daughter, out, by sunset. Halima's heart dropped. Please. What happened? Madam finally faced her, flinging a folded paper across the table. Afia's medical report. She has shamed my family. She tried to trap my son. A maid's daughter. Imagine the audacity. Halima trembled. She's just a girl. She's filth, Madam snapped, and you will both be gone today. Dio didn't speak in their defense, not once. He stood in the hallway, frozen, while the security guards carried out 2 small bags of clothes and dropped them outside the gate like trash. Afia looked at him, eyes brimming. You promised me. He didn't meet her gaze. I begged you not to tell anyone, was all he said. She slapped him. Silence. Then she turned, stomach turning, and walked away with her mother. No money, no home, only the child growing inside. Her that night, it rained again, but there were no mango trees to hide under now, only broken promises, cold streets, and a girl who had loved too blindly. And in a mansion full of lights, Dio slept in silence, the echo of her slap ringing, louder than any thunderstorm. The rain didn't stop that night. It soaked the city and the souls beneath it, especially Afia and her mother, who stood under a rusted bus stop sign, clutching each other like refugees of betrayal. They had nowhere to go. Halima, who had served the Adebowale family for over 2 decades, was dismissed without severance, without a word of thanks. Her meager savings, intended for Afia's university someday, barely covered a week's worth of food. The landlord of their shared room in the servant quarters had already locked them out. I still had my uniforms inside, Halima whispered bitterly as they walked through flooded streets. She didn't even let me collect them. I'm sorry, Mama, Afia murmured, her voice hoarse. Halima squeezed her daughter's hand but said nothing more. She was angry, yes, but not at her daughter. She had seen the signs, the soft smiles, the secret stares. She had warned Afia in hushed whispers, men like him don't marry girls like us. But the heart, once captured, listens to no warnings. That night, they slept at a shelter run by a widowed churchwoman who recognized Halima from years ago. The room smelled of old oil and wet wood. Afia curled into herself on the mattress, feeling every ache of her changing body, every rejection, every lie. The next morning brought no miracles. Halima found temporary work at a roadside food stall, chopping onions and washing pots for N500 a day. Afia tried selling fruit by the highway, but fainted from heat and fatigue on her third day. The pregnancy was progressing faster than her courage. People whispered. Some judged. Others helped in small, quiet ways. A free ultrasound from a nurse at the clinic, used baby clothes from a neighbor. But the shame was thick in the air, especially for Halima. She was a fool for trusting him, one woman muttered. Rich. Boys play with poor girls like toys, said another. Afia heard it all, swallowed it whole, and still she carried on. At 6 months, her feet swelled. At 7, she began waking from nightmares, sweating, dreaming of the Adebowale gate slamming shut on her forever. But at 8 months, something changed. She felt it, a kick, then another, a tiny rhythm of life, reminding her, "You are not alone." The delivery came suddenly 3 weeks early. Halima carried her in a rickety taxi to the clinic, screaming for help. The nurses shouted for warm water, cloth, patience. The power went out halfway through. There was no air conditioning. Just sweat, blood, and pain, but then a cry. A piercing, beautiful cry. A boy. The nurse wrapped him in a faded pink blanket and placed him in Afia's arms. "He looks like his father," she whispered, eyes filling with tears. Afia didn't reply. She looked down at her son, tracing the curve of his lips, the thickness of his lashes. A child born from love and betrayal, from promises and pain. "I'll call him Toby," she said. "Why?" "It means God is great, and because maybe someday he'll become what his father failed to be, a man." Meanwhile, across the city, Dio celebrated his birthday in a rooftop bar surrounded by shallow laughter, clinking glasses, and girls who smiled too easily. His mind, however, was elsewhere. He checked his phone for the 10th time that hour, no messages. He had deleted Afia's number, but memorized it anyway. He thought of texting, of calling, but his pride always won. "She trapped me," he told himself. "I had no choice." But his conscience didn't care for such excuses. That night, alone in his luxury apartment, Dio sat in the dark, holding a whiskey glass he hadn't touched. He thought of her eyes when she said, "You promised me." He remembered the slap, not just the sting, but what it meant, that something pure had broken. And deep in his gut, behind the arrogance and fear, something heavy began to stir, regret. But regret does not bring back time. It does not rock a newborn to sleep. It does not pay rent or silence gossip or fix a broken girl's heart. And so, in a world of wealth, Dio remained rich but empty. While in a one-room shack with peeling paint and a leaking roof, Afia held her baby close, richer in spirit than he would ever know. 3 years passed. The Adebowale mansion stood tall as ever, untouched by time or consequence. But inside its polished walls, something had shifted. Dio had returned from another failed business trip to London, this one marred by scandal. A shady investment he'd backed publicly collapsed, and social media had been ruthless. "Billionaire heir accused of recklessness with investor funds," the headlines read. "Another spoilt son destroys his father's legacy." His father, Chief Adebowale, had shouted until his veins pulsed at his neck. "You were supposed to build this family, not disgrace it." Dio said nothing. What could he say? The truth was failure had become a familiar companion. His business ventures, his relationships, his friendships, they all came apart in his hands. He drowned in parties, drank to forget, flew to cities just to feel movement. But the emptiness only deepened, and somewhere between the glass of whiskey and another night of meaningless pleasure, a name began haunting him again, Afia. She crept into his thoughts when the world got too quiet. Her eyes, not angry, but hurt. Her voice soft, firm, unforgettable. Most nights he told himself she had moved on, maybe even married. But some nights the possibility struck him like lightning. What if the child was born? What if I have a son? Guilt clung to him like smoke. It poisoned his sleep and soured his joy. And though he told no one, he had already tried to search. He'd gone through old contacts, checked with drivers. even paid a private investigator who came back saying they disappeared. No records, nothing. But Dio wasn't convinced. One rainy morning, sitting alone in his luxury SUV, he drove down to the slums of Agege, a place he had never stepped foot in before. He didn't know what he was looking for, only that something inside him needed to see, to know. What he found instead was life happening all around him, raw, loud and real, children playing barefoot in the mud, women frying akara on wood stoves, men shouting over dominoes. He walked through the market, ignoring the curious stares. He felt out of place, too clean, too privileged, too late. But then, near a dusty stall that sold used clothes, he heard a familiar voice. It was low, calm, the way he remembered. "Auntie, I know fit sell this one for N300, he get hole." He froze. It was her Afia. She wore a plain wrapper and a faded blouse. Her once flowing hair was pulled back, her hands busy sorting clothes. She looked older, thinner, but stronger. There was something in her eyes that startled him. Steel. She turned her head slightly and stopped. Their eyes met, and in that moment, the market disappeared. The years, the silence, the betrayal, all of it flooded back between them. He opened his mouth. "Afia." She stared at him, unreadable. "You shouldn't be here," she said simply. "I had to see you. You don't get to decide that anymore," she cut in, voice quiet but firm. I know I hurt you," he began. "I've thought about you every day." Her laugh was hollow. "Now you remember me after 3 years? I didn't know where you went. I tried—" "No," she said. "You didn't try. You ran." A silence stretched between them, heavy and suffocating. Is the baby okay?" he finally asked, voice shaking. Afia looked at him for a long moment. "He's not a baby anymore. His name is Toby." Dio's heart stuttered. "Can I see him?" "No," she said instantly. "You gave up that right when you let them throw us out like garbage. I want to make things right." "You can't," she snapped. Then softer. "This isn't some boardroom deal you can fix with money." He stood there, ashamed, powerless. "You have no idea what we went through," she continued. "No one helped us. No father, no calls, no apology. Just me, a baby, and a mother who cried herself to sleep every night." "I was scared," he whispered. "And I was 18, pregnant and homeless," she said, "but I didn't run." A customer approached and Afia turned away to tend to her stall. "Please leave, Dio. You don't belong here, not anymore." He lingered for a moment, but there was nothing more to say, nothing he had the right to say. He walked away slowly, shoulders heavy, heart heavier. Behind him, Afia wiped a single tear from her cheek, then returned to work. Life didn't pause for heartbreak. Not here, not anymore. Dio couldn't get Toby out of his mind. He sat in his office at Adebowale Holdings, papers scattered, meetings missed. The numbers on his laptop blurred. His father stormed in once, shouting about mismanaged funds and board complaints, but Dio barely responded. What was a business crisis compared to the reality that he had a son, a living, breathing little person who didn't even know his name? Toby Dio whispered it like a prayer. His son, his blood, his failure. He began driving to the Agege market every few days, parking at a distance. He didn't approach again. Not yet. He just watched. Afia moved with rhythm and purpose, shoulders, strong, face-focused. She ran the second-hand clothing stall efficiently, even negotiating with sharp-tongued customers like a seasoned trader. And then came Toby. The first time Dio saw him, the boy was playing near the stall, stacking empty water bottles like building blocks. He was small for his age, but sharp, eyes darting with curiosity, his laughter bright like bells in the dry heat. Dio's heart clenched. Toby had his hair, his ears, his walk, and every time Afia called his name, Dio felt a pang so deep it nearly brought him to tears. He stayed hidden behind the corner of a hardware shop, watching from the shadows like a thief, the thief of a childhood he had no part in. Toby ran to Afia often, showing her stones, broken toys, things only a TCI child finds wonder in. And every time she smiled with love and patience, the kind of love that comes from sacrifice. That night, Dio drank. Not to forget, but to dull the shame. He saw flashes of what could have been, teaching Toby how to ride a bike, carrying him on his shoulders, hearing him say "Daddy" for the first time. But those were dreams he had forfeited the day he walked. Away one Thursday, something happened. Dio stood at his usual spot when he saw Toby trip over a rock while running. The boy cried out, holding his knee. Afia rushed to him, lifting him into her lap. But she looked panicked. Blood was dripping down his leg, a long, deep cut. Her eyes darted around. The clinic was far, no taxis in sight. Without thinking, Dio stepped out from the shadows. "I'll take you," he said. Afia looked up, stunned. "What are you doing here?" "I've been coming, watching. Please, let me help." She hesitated. Then, seeing her son's pain, she nodded once. Dio scooped Toby into his arms. The boy clung to him, too hurt to notice who he was. Afia climbed into the back seat of the SUV, cradling her child. At the clinic, Dio paid without blinking. Nurses attended quickly. Toby needed 3 stitches. He cried, but the doctor praised his bravery. "He's a strong boy," the nurse said. "You must be proud." Dio smiled weakly. "I am more than I can say." Afia sat beside him in silence. Later, while Toby slept in her lap on the clinic bench, she spoke without looking at Dio. "You shouldn't have come back." "I know. He's been through enough." "So have you," Dio said quietly. She looked at him now, tired, guarded. "You don't get to play savior after vanishing for 3 years." "I don't want to play anything," he said. "I just want to be near him, even if from far. I just want to try." She stared at him long and hard. "I don't know if I can ever trust you again," she said. "But he's your son, and he deserves to know where he came from." Dio nodded, a lump in his throat. "Then let me start by being honest," he said. "No more lies, no more running." Afia stood, adjusting Toby's weight in her arms. "Don't make promises," she said. "We've had enough of those." But she didn't push him away this time, and when she walked out of the clinic, she left the door slightly ajar. For the first time, Dio didn't feel like a ghost in his son's life. He felt like a man at the edge of redemption, still far from forgiveness, but closer than yesterday. Afia stood by the clinic window, arms folded tightly across her chest. Toby was asleep again, curled up beside her on the bench, his bandaged knee resting gently against her thigh. Outside, the world bustled. Horns blared, women sold oranges in wheelbarrows, children chased after taxis with open palms. Life moved, indifferent to the pain of individuals, but inside time slowed. Dio sat quietly across from her. He hadn't spoken since she let him drive them home from the clinic the night before. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't make grand speeches, and that oddly made it harder. "I've had to be a mother and a father," Afia said suddenly, still looking outside. "I taught him how to walk. I taught him how to pray. I held him through fevers. I told him stories when we couldn't afford candles at night." Dio didn't interrupt. "I sold clothes by day, sewed by candlelight, cooked with rainwater when the taps ran dry. Every cough scared me. Every hunger pang made me question my worth." She finally turned to face him, eyes steady. "I did it without you, without a phone call, without a single word." "I know," he said, "and I'm not asking you to erase that." Afia's voice softened, but the edge remained. "You don't know what it feels like to be treated like dirt because you loved the wrong person. People looked at me like I had no value, like I was trash, like Toby was a stain." She paused. "My mother, she never smiled again, Dio. She died last year, liver failure, no insurance. I couldn't even buy her coffin. We buried her in borrowed clothes." The words hit him like bricks. He lowered his head, shame crashing over him in waves. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "Your apology can't bring her back," she replied, though her tone was not cruel, just honest. Toby stirred in his sleep, then sat up, rubbing his eyes. "Mummy, if I'm hungry," he said softly, I know, baby. We'll eat soon, she said, brushing his hair back gently. Dio stood. I'll get food. No, Afia said, firm again. Not because I don't need help, I do, but because I don't want you to think this is how you buy your way back into our lives. He looked her in the eyes, steady. Then let me earn it. In the following weeks, Dio returned, slowly, cautiously. He didn't show up with gifts or grand gestures. He came with groceries, sat beside Afia at the stall when she had headaches, played with Toby while she rested. He fixed a broken hinge on their door. He helped with homework, quietly, humbly. Toby, unaware of the full truth, quickly grew attached. He's like my uncle, he told one of the neighbor boys. He helps Mummy when she's tired. Afia watched the bond grow with guarded eyes. She didn't stop it. Toby deserved to laugh, deserved to be loved. But her heart remained cautious. Sometimes at night, when the generator hummed and Toby was asleep, she'd sit by herself and think, what if he leaves again? But the truth was undeniable. Dio was changing. He no longer lived in his father's mansion. He had moved into a modest apartment closer to Agege. He resigned from the board of Adebowale Holdings, publicly distancing himself from the corruption and greed that had built his name. People mocked him. Headlines sneered, "Fallen Prince of Lagos." But Afia saw something different. A man shedding layers of pride, one mistake at a time. One day, while walking home from the market, Dio spoke. I still don't expect you to trust me, but I need you to know. I'm not running anymore from him, from you, from who I used to be. Afia looked at him, her voice low. What changed? He smiled faintly. You and him. You didn't need wealth to raise a king, and he's growing into one already. She didn't reply, but a small part of her, the part she thought had died, flickered again. Not hope, not yet, but maybe the beginning of peace. The sun was relentless that day, beating down on the corrugated roofs of Agege like judgment. Afia walked slowly, one hand on her forehead, the other gripping a plastic bag of oranges. Toby had been coughing for 3 days. At first she dismissed it as a passing cold, but when his breathing became labored and his energy dropped, she knew it was something more. At home, Toby lay curled on the thin mattress, his chest rising and falling in shallow rhythm. His lips were dry, his eyes glazed with fever. She didn't wait. She picked him up, called Dio with trembling fingers, and said only one word: hospital. Dio arrived in minutes at the hospital reception. Chaos buzzed around them, mothers weeping, nurses shouting, children crying. Afia clutched Toby close, panic in her eyes. He needs oxygen, the nurse said. Pneumonia. We'll need to admit him immediately. Do you have insurance? No, Afia said, voice trembling. I'll cover everything, Dio said quickly. Private room, best doctors, please, just save him. Afia didn't argue. Pride had no place where a child's life was at stake. The hours crawled. Toby was placed on IV fluids and oxygen. The doctor explained it was caught early, but could have worsened fast. He's a strong boy, the nurse said gently. That helped. Afia sat beside his bed the entire night, her hand never leaving his. Dio remained in the corridor, refusing to leave the hospital, pacing the floor in silence. By morning, Toby's breathing steadied. He opened his eyes, weak but smiling. Mummy, water. She burst into quiet tears and kissed his forehead. Later that day, Dio stepped into the room holding a small box of his favorite biscuits. Toby smiled sleepily. Uncle Dio. Hey, champ, Dio said, sitting beside the bed. You scared us. I'm okay now, Toby whispered, and in that moment, watching his son's fragile smile, something shifted in Dio. Not just guilt, but understanding. This was no longer about making amends. It was about responsibility, about showing up, about staying. After the doctor left and Toby dozed again, Dio turned to Afia. I want to be part of his life, and fully, he said. She said nothing. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but this is my son. I'm ready to fight for him. Not with lawyers or money, with presence, with effort, with consistency. Afia looked tired, not just physically, but from years of carrying everything alone. What does that mean? She asked softly. It means school fees, medical bills, time, holidays, teaching him about the world, sitting through tantrums, answering hard questions. She shook her head. It's not that simple. I don't expect it to be, he replied. But I'm not walking away again. Even if you don't want me, he deserves both parents. A silence lingered, filled with unspoken wounds. Then a fear looked him in the eye. You want to be a father? Then be one. But don't come in and out like a visitor. Don't confuse him. I won't, she sighed. We'll take it one step at a time. Nothing more. That was all he needed. Weeks passed. Toby recovered and began kindergarten at a private school, a compromise between Afia's insistence on discipline and Dayo's desire for quality education. Dayo picked him up twice a week. They visited the library, played football at a dusty field, shared suya under a mango tree, one eerily similar to the one where it all began. He no longer called Dayo uncle. One day he asked, Mummy, why does Dayo come all the time? Afia sat him down, heart thumping. Because he loves you and he's your father. Toby blinked. Really? Yes. He thought for a moment, then smiled. I like that. It was a small moment, but it broke something open in Afia. Her heart, so tightly guarded, began to breathe again. Later, she watched them from her window, Dayo helping Toby with a toy car, laughing as it crashed. It was the first time she saw Dayo not as the boy who ran, but as the man who returned. He had given up the Adebowale name publicly, started his own small NGO supporting single mothers in Lagos, funded by what was left of his personal trust. He named it Halima's Hands, after Afia's mother. That gesture alone brought tears to her eyes. Redemption was never free. It cost Dayo his status, his wealth, his family's pride, but it bought him something else. A chance, a beginning, not to reclaim the past, but to build a better future. It was the rainy season again. Fat drops pelted the rooftops of Agege, turning narrow roads into brown rivers and slowing everything to a thoughtful hush. In the small apartment, Afia now called home. Slightly bigger than before, thanks to her growing business, the window fogged as Toby pressed his tiny hands against it. Rainy days make me sleepy, he said with a yawn. Dayo smiled from the small dining table, where he sat reading a worn storybook. Then it's the perfect time for a story, hey? Toby nodded eagerly and ran over, climbing into his lap. Afia watched from the kitchen, stirring a pot of egusi. The smell filled the room, warm and thick with memory. Which one today? Dayo asked. The Lion and the Rabbit, Toby declared. Again? He laughed. You know it by heart. Toby grinned and Dayo began to read, voice animated, eyes twinkling. The boy giggled at all the right parts, completely wrapped in his father's voice. Afia stirred silently, soaking in the sound of her child's laughter, and realizing how different her world had become. Months ago, she could barely picture peace. But now her evenings weren't silent or bitter. They were noisy, full of burnt rice and scattered toys, and for the first time in years, full of hope. When the story ended and Toby was tucked into bed, Dayo came to the kitchen and leaned against the doorway. His shirt was speckled with flour from their earlier attempt at baking plantain bread. She's proud of you, you know, he said gently. Who? Afia asked, wiping her hands on a towel. Your mum. Her hands paused. She looked up at him. I've been thinking, he continued. I know we're not where we used to be, and maybe we never will be. But what you've done for Toby, for yourself, it's strength I can't begin to measure. Afia looked at him carefully, reading the sincerity in his face. No longer the cocky boy from the mansion, no longer hiding behind charm or excuses. People think forgiveness is a clean thing, she said slowly. Like it comes in one wave and then it's done, but it doesn't. It's jagged. It's slow. It reopens sometimes. I know, he said. I'm not asking you to pretend. I used to want you to suffer the way I did, she admitted. To lose everything and feel small like I did in that storm. That night they threw us out. Dayo looked down. I deserved it. But then I realized, she said, voice softening, if I let that bitterness guide me, I'd pass it to Toby. He'd grow up with anger instead of grace. She took a breath. So no, I don't forgive you the way fairy tales end. I forgive you like a scar heals, slowly, painfully, but it does heal. He nodded, eyes glistening. Thank you. And I'm not saying I love you, not now maybe. Not ever again. But I respect who you're becoming, and that's more than I thought I could say. Silence stretched between them, but it wasn't empty. It was full of everything they had survived. Outside, thunder rolled, but inside, a different kind of storm had passed. Dio stepped forward, hesitant. Would it be all right if I stayed for dinner? Afia gave a small smile. If you do the dishes after. They both laughed, really laughed, for the first time in what felt like lifetimes. Later that night, when the rain had softened and Toby was fast asleep, Afia stepped outside with a cup of tea. The street shimmered under the glow of a flickering streetlight. Her soul felt lighter. Dio joined her, bringing a second cup. They stood in silence for a while. You know, he said eventually, when I met you under that mango tree, I didn't know I was meeting the person who'd break me, teach me, and rebuild me all in one lifetime. She chuckled. That mango tree was cursed. Or blessed, he said. She didn't reply, but she didn't disagree either, because some stories don't end with a kiss or a ring. Some stories end with growth, with understanding, with standing beside someone instead of clinging to them. And in that, there is a kind of love that lasts. Not the kind shouted from rooftops, but the kind built quietly, brick by brick, moment by moment, by those who have known pain, survived it, and still choose to try.